Agency-client relationships. Now this is thoughtful. Hello, I'm Trevor Lai in Shanghai. This week on Thoughtful China, we'll talk about the words every agency director hates to hear from a client. We're having a pitch. In the early days of advertising, accounts often stayed with agencies for years, even decades. Today in China, agencies often compete for short-term projects. Marketers are under constant pressure to improve the ways they source, manage, and align resources, such as advertising agencies and marketing services providers. This week on Thoughtful China, we'll talk about winning pitch strategies, as well as procurement and compensation policies, cost containment, and maintaining agency-client relationships, while our own PT Black will share haggling tips from China's street markets. But first, with us is Sarah Millard, Director of Indirect Procurement for Coca-Cola in Greater China and Korea. Sarah, tell us a bit about what you do at Coca-Cola.
I lead a team that support the Coca-Cola China business unit in managing our operational and marketing expenditure. Primary focus is on our marketing expenditure because of the importance to the business and also the level of spend that we have in that area.
And how is this job different in China than in other Western markets?
My first response would be speed is a big difference. The market here in China is changing so rapidly that the nature of our business is changing on a daily basis. So for us, on a procurement perspective, we're constantly having to adapt and change the way that we operate and the way that we work very quickly with our marketing teams.
Can you give an example of one of these changes that's come across that's quite significant in your time?
I think compensation models is a very good example of how that has changed, both in terms of the industry, not only to China, but in a global perspective. But here in China, people are very willing to adapt very quickly to a model that may have taken longer to apply in other markets. So, for example, the implementation of value-based compensation that we have here, that has been applied and addressed very quickly, that I think in other markets it's taken longer.
And what do you look for in agency pitches?
We look for a number of factors. We have criteria and we do set scorecards when we're managing pitch processes. Very critical for us is the capability and the resource of the agencies that we're looking at, the skill sets and the knowledge and experience that they can bring specifically about the China market. We look for creativity, of course, but we also look for a really strong business awareness, an understanding of the Coca-Cola business in China and the consumers that we're addressing. Integrity is also a very important part, and I think naturally productivity and ensuring that we get the best value from the services being provided.
Now, you talked about significant changes in the marketplace affecting the procurement process, but how have some of these changes reflected in how agencies approach you and perhaps the way that they're even pitching, whether it's how they prepare their presentations or their proposals? How have you seen their behavior change?
I think the idea of just presenting a PowerPoint is no longer satisfactory. Anyone can do that. I think really very much you have to have an understanding of the content and an ability to actually demonstrate that you can deliver the work in China. It's very easy to say that you have all these skills and services, but you actually need to be able to demonstrate that and demonstrate it not just by the experiences you have in a global market, but also experiences that you have delivered here in China.
Now, when you talk about all the other factors you mentioned when evaluating the agency, whether it's their past experience or the understanding of the business, also obviously price comes into play. And the budget restrictions and things like that are an important factor in any decision. But especially in China, for not just Coke and companies in general, do you find that there's a higher sensitivity towards pricing?
I think any market you have to be very sensitive to the return on investment. I think it would be negative of me to say just focus on pricing. It's really all about the value that we're asking for our agencies to provide. So I think any market, it's not only China, that really needs to think very clearly about what services it's providing to its client and what's the return on investment. I think it's no longer just an issue around price.
But when we look at issues like creativity, for example, how do you calculate the return on investment, when evaluating those agencies? You have a more creative agency, but at a much higher price. You have a more budget-conscious one, but perhaps less creative. How do you measure that?
A very good question. And I think the industry is trying to still work that one out in terms of measuring creativity and what value to associate with it. When we're looking at the values that we apply to our scope of work and to the deliverables within the communications, we're looking at a number of factors. Again, talent is really important. We're looking at the strategy. Do they understand the strategy? Do they understand the business? We're looking at are there other players in the market that can also provide these services? Is it unique to that agency? Are they the only ones coming up with those ideas and those skills? Of course, every business has budget considerations. I wouldn't call it restrictions, but they are definitely considerations that you would need to apply.
Now that all the global networks have a presence in China, how do you compare their offices here in terms of resources, talent, and experience with their more established ones in other markets?
I think that it's not just applicable to the global agencies. I think it's also regional or local players. The business here is so dynamic and it's growing so fast that it's growing faster sometimes at a situation where the talent pool isn't readily available. So I think the challenges here for the China agencies, or agencies operating in China, is finding the right resources and also retaining those resources. So I think that's the biggest difference, the biggest challenge that they have.
What are some of the mistakes you've seen in pitch presentations in China?
Over-promising is a key one. Over-promising and not giving examples of their experience and skill set, but not making it applicable to the China market, to actually having it demonstrated that it's actually China market that it was delivered in. But definitely over-promising, saying that they can deliver more than when you actually then put it into practice is realised. And I think also ensuring during the process that you have the people that are going to be working with the client on a daily basis, taking the leadership, taking the role, empowering them within the pitch process, because after all, those will be the people you're working with.
What's the biggest thing you wish all agencies understood about Coca-Cola's procurement process in China?
I would hope that they think that we're fair and objective, that we have structured processes, that we are organised and developed in the way that we have pitch process. I know certainly in the past we've had positive comments in that area. We still need to continue to develop within the procurement industry in China in terms of managing the process more effectively. I think not only with Coca-Cola but also with other industries as well. But I think the fair and objective position that procurement can bring to a situation, particularly within agency management, is very important.
So when you look at from the agency perspective, and perhaps some partners that you've worked with for a number of years in China, and when they're put back through the pitching and the procurement process, how do you frame it so that it feels as if it's also a winning experience for the agencies? Because often they complain sometimes, they have about client loyalty in China. And I've had this account for a couple of years, but now I have to go back in and do this pitch all from scratch again. How do you maintain that relationship? Because I'm sure managing relationships is a huge part of your job role.
Absolutely. I think it's also, if you're an incumbent and then you're put into a pitch process situation, it is also an opportunity for that agency to challenge themselves. and to be able to really think about new things, which sometimes when you're working on a continual basis, it's not so easy to step out of that box. So I think the pitch process with an incumbent is a great opportunity for them. And it's a challenging opportunity, of course. That's the reason why we would do it, because we're looking to see in the market for what all players can bring. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to ensure that we are getting the right service and delivering the right value for our marketing services.
Thanks, Sarah. Now PT Black will share haggling tips from China's street markets.